The night my family erased me did not arrive with shouting slammed doors or raised voices. It came quietly dressed in linen napkins and polite smiles, served alongside cranberry sauce and dry turkey. It was Thanksgiving in a coastal town outside Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of place where homes had wraparound porches and histories thicker than the humidity. My parents' house sat on a manicured corner lot, white columns, freshly painted windows glowing warm against the early winter dusk. From the outside, it looked like stability, tradition, success. Inside, it felt like a courtroom. I sat near the end of the long dining table, hands folded in my lap, back straight, practicing the kind of stillness women learn when they are expected to be agreeable. I was 32 years old, married, independent, employed full-time. And yet in that room, I felt like a child waiting to be told where I belonged. My name is Evelyn Carter, and that night was the moment I learned how easily love becomes conditional when money is involved. The table was crowded. My parents at the head, my younger sister Amanda beside her husband Daniel, a few extended relatives filling the remaining chairs. Laughter drifted easily around the room. Wine glasses clinked. Someone commented on how nice everything looked, how lucky we all were. I had heard those words my entire life. My mother cleared her throat. It was subtle, but I noticed. I always noticed. That single sound shifted the air, pulled attention toward her like a magnet. Conversations faded, forks paused midair. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, resting her hand lightly on my father's arm. My stomach tightened. My body recognized danger before my mind could name it. My father nodded, wearing the same expression he used when announcing decisions that were already made. "About the future," he added. Amanda smiled, fingers intertwined with Daniel's. He squeezed her hand, confident, relaxed, already comfortable in a role he hadn't earned but had been promised. "The family business, it needs clarity," my mother continued. "Structure, direction." I waited. I told myself not to assume, not to react, to stay calm. "We've decided," my father said, to transition ownership to Amanda and Daniel at the start of the new year. The words landed cleanly like a stamp pressed onto paper. No pause, no explanation, no mention of me. For a split second, I thought I had misheard. My ears rang softly like pressure building. I searched their faces for correction, for inclusion, for my name. It never came. "This doesn't mean we don't value you," my mother added quickly, finally glancing my way. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. "You've always been so dependable." Dependable. Not capable, not deserving, dependable. Amanda reached across the table toward me, her expression soft, almost kind. "We'll still need you," she said. "You know the clients better than anyone. You'll be a huge help during the transition." A huge help. I nodded automatically because that was what I had been trained to do. My hands stayed steady, my face stayed neutral. Years of emotional restraint held firm even as something inside my chest split open quietly. No one asked if I agreed. No one asked how I felt. Because no one expected resistance. The conversation moved on. Wine was poured. Laughter returned. My exclusion was treated as a logistical detail, not a personal erasure. I stared at my plate. Turkey untouched, mashed potatoes cooling. I realized then that I had spent years feeding a system that would not hesitate to consume me. After dinner, I excused myself and stepped onto the back porch. The air was heavy with salt and damp leaves. I took a deep breath, letting the coolness press against my skin, grounding me. My phone vibrated in my hand. A message from an unknown number. "You should look at your trust documents, soon." No greeting, no explanation, no signature. Just enough to make my heart begin to race. I stared at the screen, the sound of my family's laughter floating through the open door behind me. For the first time that night, fear crept in. Not sharp panic, but something colder, something aware. I had always believed my place in this family was earned through loyalty, through sacrifice, through showing up when others didn't. But standing there reading that message, I felt a shift. A quiet understanding settling in my bones. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't accidental. This had been planned. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and returned inside, past the smiles, past the warmth that now felt staged. I caught my sister's eye across the room. She smiled again, the same gentle expression she had worn at the table. I wondered how long she had known. That night, lying awake in the guest room I had slept in countless times, before I stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment I had ignored. Every late night at the office, every holiday spent working while others celebrated, every reassurance that I was needed, appreciated, safe. I didn't sleep, because some instincts once awakened refused to be quiet. And that message, small and simple as it was, marked the beginning. Not of my loss, But of my reckoning, I didn't confront anyone the next morning, or the morning after that. I went home unpacked slowly and moved through my days like someone underwater. Everything sounded muted. Familiar routines felt strange, like clothes that no longer fit properly. I answered emails, returned calls, showed up to work at the family company as if nothing had happened. On the surface, nothing had, but beneath it, something had shifted. And once it does, you can't force it back into place. I have always been observant. It was how I survived being the reliable one, the dependable daughter, the sister who didn't need as much because she could handle more. Over the years, I learned that silence often reveals more than confrontation ever could. So I watched. I watched the way Amanda lingered in meetings she never attended before, the way Daniel started speaking in absolutes, using phrases like going forward and long-term vision, even though he'd barely learned the company's client list. I watched how my parents suddenly referred to me as support instead of leadership. Small words, big meaning. The message from the unknown number replayed in my head. You should look at your trust documents. Soon. 3 days later, I scheduled an appointment with an attorney. Her name was Margaret Hale, mid-50s, calm voice, sharp eyes, the kind of woman who had seen too many families tear themselves apart over money to waste time on pleasantries. Her office smelled faintly of old books and black coffee. She didn't smile when I explained why I was there. She didn't need to. Let's start with the trust, she said, opening a folder. Your grandmother's estate. I nodded. It was supposed to be simple. Split evenly between my sister and me. Margaret hummed softly. That was the original structure. Original. She slid a document toward me and pointed to a section near the middle. This amendment was filed 3 years ago, she said. My stomach tightened. That's not possible. My grandmother was already sick. She wasn't making changes then. And yet Margaret replied the amendment exists, and it was notarized. I leaned closer. My name appeared on the page, my signature, or something that looked exactly like it. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I didn't sign this, I said quietly. I believe you, Margaret replied without hesitation, because this signature was traced, not written. My pulse thudded in my ears. What does the amendment do? She didn't sugarcoat it. It transfers controlling interest in the company to your sister upon your grandmother's passing. Your inheritance is capped, conditional, and dependent on your continued employment under the new ownership. I stared at the page, my vision blurring. They planned for this, I whispered. Yes, Margaret said, and they were careful. Careful! That word made me cold. Who filed it, I asked. She checked the records again. Your parents were the signatories, but the amendment was prepared by an outside consultant. Name, I asked already, bracing myself. Margaret paused. Rachel Moore. The name landed hard. Rachel, Daniel's former business partner. The woman who had attended family dinners, birthday parties, holiday brunches. The woman who always asked detailed questions about finances under the guise of curiosity. The woman who hugged me at Christmas and told me how lucky I was to be part of such a supportive family. I felt sick. She's been at the office, I said, helping with restructuring. Margaret's expression didn't change. Of course she has, I swallowed. Is there any chance this was a misunderstanding? Margaret leaned back in her chair. Evelyn, forgery at this level doesn't happen accidentally. This was coordinated. That word again. Coordinated. I left her office with copies of documents and a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. The sky outside was bright, painfully blue. People walked past laughing, living lives untouched by the quiet destruction unfolding inside mine. I drove straight to the office. My keycard didn't work. I stood there staring at the red light blinking back at me, my reflection faint in the glass door. The receptionist looked up and froze when she saw me. Oh, hi, Evelyn. Hi, I said evenly. My card isn't working. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. Amanda asked me to tell you she'll call you later. When I asked, soon, she said, already looking away. I turned and walked out before she could see my hands shaking. I called Amanda from my car. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice tight. I'm in a meeting. I saw the trust documents, I said. Silence. Then a sigh, long, irritated. You're overreacting, she said. Mom and Dad just wanted to simplify things. By signing my name, I asked. Don't use that word, she snapped. You always make everything sound so dramatic. I laughed then, a short, sharp sound that surprised us both. You knew, I said quietly. Another pause. Then you've always landed on your feet, Evie. You'll be fine. That was it. No denial, no apology, no shame. In that moment, the truth settled fully. They didn't think I deserved it because they believed I didn't need it. I ended the call and sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, my chest tight, but my mind suddenly clear. That evening, accompanying Christmas lights flickered on across the street from my apartment. Soft music drifted from a nearby house. Everything looked peaceful. I called Margaret. "I'm ready," I said. "For what?" she asked. "To stop being dependable," I replied, "and start being dangerous." She exhaled slowly. "Good, because they've underestimated you." I hung up and stared out the window, watching the lights glow against the dark. They thought the story was already written. They were wrong. This was only the beginning. The second message arrived on a Tuesday morning disguised as ordinary. I was standing in line at a coffee shop near my apartment, listening to two strangers argue softly about almond milk versus oat when my phone vibrated in my hand. "Check the Christmas accounts. Someone's been moving money." That was it. No greeting, no urgency, no explanation. Just a warning. I stepped out of line without ordering and walked back to my car, my pulse beginning to thud in my ears. The word Christmas lodged itself in my chest. That account had been set aside years ago, a holding account connected to my grandmother's trust, used for seasonal distributions, employee bonuses, charitable gifts. It wasn't supposed to be touched outside of December. I drove straight to the bank. The building was modern and glass-heavy, designed to feel transparent and reassuring. Inside it felt sterile, too clean, too quiet. I gave my name at the desk and was escorted into a small office where a young banker smiled professionally and asked how she could help. "I need to review recent activity on my trust-linked accounts," I said. "Specifically, the seasonal reserve." Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. The smile faded. "Oh," she said softly. My stomach dropped. "What?" "There have been several transfers," she replied, "over the last 8 months." 8 months. She turned the screen toward me. Rows of transactions filled the page. Withdrawals, transfers, authorization codes, each one neatly logged, officially approved. Each one made in my name. "I didn't authorize these," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at me, concern flickering behind professionalism. "The system shows verified credentials." Verified. That word felt like a slap. "Where did the money go?" I asked. She clicked again. "Several intermediary accounts, some domestic, some offshore." Offshore. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "Can you print everything?" I asked. She nodded immediately. "I'll also flag this for review." As the printer hummed, my hands rested on my knees, fingers clenched tightly together. This wasn't just theft, it was methodical. Someone had studied the structure of the trust, learned how to move money without triggering alarms, timed withdrawals to look routine. Someone who knew the system. Someone who had access. I left the bank with a thick envelope and a certainty that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't Amanda acting alone. I went home and spread the documents across my kitchen table. My grandmother's old dining table, the one she insisted I take when she downsized years ago. The wood was worn smooth in places, etched with tiny imperfections. History, memory. I traced the transactions with my finger dates, lining up with holidays, conferences, periods when I'd been traveling or distracted. That was when I noticed something else. The authorization timestamps. Most were executed late at night, after midnight, when I was asleep, when my phone wasn't in my hand. My chest tightened. I thought about all the times Daniel had helped with my phone. Updated apps, fixed glitches, installed security software. I thought about Rachel Moore's questions, innocent on the surface, curious, persistent. I thought about my parents' sudden insistence on centralizing financial oversight. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening I drove to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. My mother opened the door, surprised but smiling. "Evelyn, honey, you should have called. I need to talk to you," I said. My father appeared behind her, his expression already guarded. We sat in the living room, the same room where childhood photos lined the shelves, proof of belonging, evidence of history. I placed the bank documents on the coffee table. "Money has been taken from the trust," I said calmly, "in my name." My mother's hand flew to her chest. "What?" My father leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Are you accusing us of something?" "I'm asking for an explanation," I replied. Silence stretched. Then my mother began to cry. Softly at first, controlled, tears without sound. "We did what we thought was best," she whispered. "Best? For who?" I asked. My father's voice hardened. "You're being ungrateful, after everything we've done for you." "There it is," I said quietly. He stood abruptly. "How dare you speak to us like this?" "How dare you sign my name?" I replied. The room froze. My mother stopped crying. My father's face drained of color. For the first time, they didn't deny it. They deflected. "You don't understand," my mother said. "This was about protecting the family." "No," I said. "This was about controlling me." My father pointed a finger toward the door. "You're tearing this family apart." I stood. "No," I replied. "You already did. I'm just refusing to be quiet about it." I left without another word. That night I sat alone at my grandmother's table, the documents stacked neatly in front of me. The house was quiet. The world outside moved on unaware. I called Margaret. "They're stealing," I said, "and they're coordinated." She didn't sound surprised. Then we proceed. "With what?" I asked. "With exposure," she replied, "and precision." I stared at the papers, at the proof, at the careful cruelty embedded in every line. "They think I won't fight," I said. Margaret paused. "Do you want to prove them wrong?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. I hung up and looked around my apartment. The walls I paid for, the table my grandmother trusted me with, the life I had built quietly, patiently. They had taken my inheritance, but they had also handed me something far more powerful, the truth. And truth once seen clearly doesn't disappear. It sharpens, and it waits. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday morning quietly and without ceremony. No dramatic confrontation, no announcement, no warning. That was intentional. Margaret insisted on precision. People who believe they are in control make mistakes when they're surprised, she told me. We let them think everything is still working. So I went to work, or rather I showed up. I walked into the office like I had every day for years, badge temporarily reactivated after I emailed IT under the guise of a system error. No one questioned it. They never questioned me. That was the irony of being dependable. You're trusted until the moment you aren't useful anymore. Amanda was already there sitting in my old chair, not literally but symbolically. She had moved into the corner office, my office, the one with the windows overlooking the harbor, the one I had earned by staying late and leaving last. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey," she said as if nothing had changed. "We should talk later." Later had become her favorite word. I nodded, walked to my desk, and logged in. What I did next wasn't illegal, it wasn't unethical, and it wasn't sabotage. It was documentation. I began forwarding emails to my personal account, contracts, authorization chains, messages that mentioned Rachel Moore's involvement, threads where my parents approved financial decisions they later denied knowledge of, spreadsheets showing shifts in account management responsibilities. Margaret had told me what to look for. Patterns, intent, knowledge. By noon, I had enough to make my hands tremble. This wasn't just theft. It was a strategy. Every move had been designed to look reasonable in isolation. A signature here, a transfer there, a title change justified by efficiency. But together they formed a story, a clear one. I printed nothing, saved nothing locally. Everything was backed up to an encrypted drive Margaret had provided. At 2 p.m, Daniel stopped by my desk. "Hey," he said casually, leaning against the partition like he owned the place. "We're restructuring roles. Might need you to take on more administrative support." "Support." Again. "I'm happy to help," I said evenly. He smiled, satisfied. "I knew you'd understand." He walked away without noticing my screen. That evening I met Margaret in her office. She reviewed the files methodically, her expression growing sharper with each page. "This confirms intent," she said finally. "And coordination." "Is it enough?" I asked. "It will be," she replied. "But we're not done." "What's next?" She folded her hands. "Now we see how they react." They reacted faster than I expected. 2 days later, my access was revoked completely. No explanation, no meeting, just a locked door and a polite email from HR citing organizational changes. Amanda called that night. "You didn't have to involve lawyers," she said, irritation barely masked beneath forced calm. "We could have worked this out privately." "You forged my signature," I replied. Silence. "Then you're making things difficult." "No," I said, "I'm making them visible." She hung up. The next call came from my father. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "You've embarrassed us." "You embarrassed yourselves," I replied. "This ends now," he said. "Withdraw the lawsuit." "No." "You'll regret this." I exhaled slowly. "I already regret trusting you." I ended the call before he could respond. That night, the third message arrived. "They're panicking. Watch your credit. They'll try to flip the narrative." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Flip the narrative. By morning, I understood exactly what that meant. My credit card was declined at the grocery store. My checking account showed a temporary freeze. An alert flashed on my phone, unusual activity detected. They weren't just stealing. They were trying to destabilize me. Margaret moved quickly. Emergency motions, protective orders, formal notifications sent to the bank and credit agencies. "They're attempting retaliation," she said, "which works in our favor." How, I asked? "Because now it's documented," she replied, "and judges don't like retaliation." The pressure intensified. Extended family members stopped calling. Friends became distant. Whispers circulated. I heard through a former coworker that my parents were telling people I was unstable, that I was struggling emotionally, that I had misunderstood financial documents and reacted impulsively. I recognized the tactic. Discredit the woman, invalidate her reality, make her doubt herself. It would have worked once. It didn't now. One afternoon as I was leaving Margaret's office, I noticed a woman standing across the street pretending to scroll on her phone. Rachel Moore. She looked up when our eyes met. Didn't smile. Didn't look away. Just watched. That night, Margaret confirmed what I already suspected. She's not just a consultant, she said. She's the architect. What does she get out of this? I asked. Margaret leaned back. Percentage, power, and protection. From who? Your family, she said. Until they don't need her anymore. I thought of the way Rachel asked questions, the way she lingered, the way she always knew more than she should. They'll sacrifice her, I said quietly. Yes, Margaret replied. But not before she tries to take someone down with her. I drove home in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I had crossed a line. There was no going back. But strangely, I didn't feel afraid. I felt awake. They had underestimated me because I was quiet. They confused compliance with weakness. They forgot something fundamental. I knew their systems, I knew their habits, and now I knew their fear. The next chapter of this story wouldn't be written in polite emails or family dinners. It would be written in court filings, financial audits, and sworn testimony. And for the first time, I was ready to speak. Not as the dependable daughter, but as the woman they tried to erase, and failed. The first subpoena arrived on a Friday afternoon, thin and unassuming, in a plain white envelope. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it, feeling the strange calm that comes when fear finally turns into inevitability. This was no longer theoretical, no longer emotional. This was procedural. Margaret smiled when I showed her. Not warmly, not kindly, but with satisfaction. Good, she said. That means the court is listening. Listening. For years I had spoken softly, carefully, strategically. Now the system itself was leaning in. The subpoena wasn't for me. It was for the company's financial records. All of them. 5 years' worth. When Amanda found out, she didn't call. She showed up. She stood outside my apartment door on Saturday morning, arms crossed, eyes tight, wearing the same blazer she used in meetings when she wanted to look authoritative. You blindsided us, she said the moment I opened the door. You blindsided me first, I replied. She stepped inside without asking, glancing around like she was inspecting damage. You could have ruined everything, she said. The company, Mom and Dad, Daniel. You mean the people who stole from me? I asked calmly. She flinched. You don't understand how this works. I studied her then. Really studied her. The tension in her jaw, the way her eyes darted, calculating. This wasn't confidence. It was fear dressed up as control. I understand exactly how this works, I said. You just didn't expect me to understand it in time. She dropped her voice. Rachel says this can still be fixed. There it was. Rachel. What does she want? I asked. Amanda hesitated. She thinks if you withdraw the lawsuit, the trust amendment can be adjusted. Adjusted. You mean undone, I said. Partially, Amanda replied. You'd still get something. Something. I laughed quietly. Tell Rachel she should be talking to her own lawyer. Amanda's face hardened. You're being vindictive. No, I said. I'm being accurate. She left without another word, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. That night, the anonymous number messaged again. She's nervous. She didn't expect Discovery to move this fast. She's already cleaning up. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady. Cleaning up meant destroying evidence, which meant mistakes. Monday morning, Margaret called before I even finished my coffee. Rachel Moore's firm just attempted to backdate compliance documents, she said. They messed up the timestamps. My heart skipped. Is that good? It's excellent, Margaret replied. It's illegal. By Wednesday, Rachel was officially named in the suit. By Thursday, her accounts were frozen pending investigation. And by Friday, my parents stopped speaking to me entirely. The silence was loud. I heard from a cousin that my mother was telling people she hadn't slept in weeks, that she was devastated, that she didn't recognize me anymore. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it wasn't true, but because she still believed I existed for her comfort. The pressure came from all sides. Former co-workers sent cautious messages asking if I was okay. Old friends avoided the topic entirely. My phone rang less. Invitations stopped. Isolation is another tool families use when control slips, Margaret warned me. They'll try to exhaust you emotionally. I nodded. They trained me for that. The deposition was scheduled for early December. Rachel first, then my parents, then Amanda and Daniel. I spent evenings preparing, reviewing documents, timelines, transaction trails. Each page reinforced what I already knew. This wasn't about business. It was about hierarchy. I had violated it by refusing to disappear quietly. The night before Rachel's deposition, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my grandmother's table, running my fingers along the worn edge, remembering how she used to look at me when she thought no one else was watching. Like she saw me, like she trusted me. That memory steadied me more than any legal preparation ever could. The next day, Margaret called from the courthouse. "You were right," she said, Rachel cracked. My breath caught. "How?" "She contradicted herself," Margaret replied, "multiple times. Claimed ignorance about the trust amendment, then referenced details only the preparer would know." I closed my eyes. "She tried to shift blame to your parents," Margaret continued. "Said she was following instructions. And them I asked." "They'll say the same thing about her," Margaret replied. The machine was eating itself. By the time my parents were deposed, the story they told no longer matched the evidence. Emails surfaced. Authorization chains unraveled. Dates didn't align. My father grew angry. My mother cried. Neither convinced the judge. Amanda's deposition was the most revealing. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She justified. Every choice framed as necessity. Every betrayal reframed as efficiency. When asked if she believed I deserved equal ownership, she hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Afterward, Margaret met me outside the courthouse. "They're offering a settlement," she said. My stomach tightened. "What kind?" "Full restoration of your trust interest," she replied. "Public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Rachel's removal from all financial oversight, and a confidential damages payment. And the company I asked," Margaret met my eyes, "they want you back." I thought about the office, the chair, the years. "No," I said. Margaret smiled softly. "I thought you'd say that." "What happens if I refuse?" I asked. "They go to trial," she replied, "and they lose more than money." I looked up at the gray winter sky. For years I thought justice meant reclaiming what was taken. Now I understood something deeper. Justice was choosing not to return to the place that tried to erase me. "Let's go to trial," I said. Margaret nodded. "Then this ends the right way." As we walked to our cars, my phone buzzed one last time from the unknown number. "She's done, they all are. You changed the ending." I slipped the phone into my pocket, my chest light, my step steady. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. It meant patience, and patience, when paired with truth, is unstoppable. Trial stripped away the illusion my family had spent decades perfecting. No polished dinners, no careful smiles, no private conversations behind closed doors. Just facts, documents, timelines, and a courtroom that did not care who hosted Christmas or who had always been considered the reasonable one. I sat at the plaintiff's table on the first morning, hands folded, shoulders relaxed, wearing a navy dress Margaret recommended because it photographed neutral and authoritative. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted credibility. Across the aisle, my parents sat stiffly beside their attorney. My mother's eyes were rimmed red. My father stared straight ahead, jaw locked. Amanda sat beside Daniel, her posture rigid, chin lifted slightly too high. Rachel Moore sat alone, 2 seats away from them, already isolated. That separation was not accidental. Alliances fracture when consequences appear. The judge entered. The room stood. Then silence fell thick and absolute. Margaret opened with clarity, not drama. "This case is about systematic financial exploitation disguised as family governance," she said. "It is about the misuse of trust, the weaponization of loyalty, and the assumption that one woman would remain silent because she always had before." I didn't look at my family. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke first. Account records were displayed on large screens, authorization trails, signature comparisons, timestamp analysis showing activity during hours I could not have approved anything. The defense tried to frame it as confusion, poor communication, family misunderstanding. That strategy collapsed by mid-morning. Margaret introduced the internal emails. Messages between my parents discussing timing, emails between Daniel and Rachel referencing risk windows, a spreadsheet titled Transition Buffer with projected financial loss allocated entirely to me. When the judge leaned forward, I felt something inside me loosen. Rachel testified first. She entered the stand, composed, professional, confident in the way people are when they believe intelligence can outrun accountability. It couldn't. Margaret let her talk, let her explain, let her contradict herself. By the time Rachel claimed she had never accessed my signature files, Margaret quietly displayed a login record with Rachel's credentials highlighted in yellow. Rachel blinked, adjusted in her seat, swallowed. Then came my father. He was less controlled. He bristled at questions, objected emotionally instead of legally. His voice rose when Margaret asked why my authorization was required at all if the amendment was truly in my best interest. "That's irrelevant," he snapped. The judge corrected him. "It was very relevant." My mother's testimony was quieter, more emotional. She spoke of fear, of uncertainty, of wanting to keep the family together. Margaret asked one question that ended it. "Did you ever tell Evelyn about the amendment before it was filed?" My mother hesitated. "No," she whispered. "Did you ever intend to—" Silence. The courtroom heard the answer anyway. Amanda was last. She walked to the stand like someone entering a negotiation, not a reckoning. She spoke confidently about leadership, about responsibility, about how someone had to make hard choices. Margaret waited. Then she asked, "At any point did you object to Evelyn's exclusion?" Amanda's eyes flickered. "I trusted our parents' judgment," she said. Margaret nodded. "Even when it benefited you?" "Yes." "Even when it harmed me?" "Yes." That was it. No anger, no shouting, just truth. When I testified, the room felt smaller. Margaret asked simple questions. I answered them plainly. I spoke about working weekends, about missed holidays, about being told I was reliable while decisions were made without me. I spoke about discovering the forged signature, about the money disappearing, about being called unstable when I asked for answers. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't asking to be believed. I was stating facts. When the defense attorney cross-examined me, he tried to provoke emotion. "Isn't it true you were resentful of your sister's success?" "No," I said. "I was resentful of being erased." He tried again. "Isn't it possible you misunderstood the financial arrangements?" "No," I said calmly. "I understood them very well. That's how I noticed the fraud." The judge watched closely. By the third day, the courtroom energy had shifted. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a pattern. Margaret closed with one sentence that echoed long after she sat down. "Silence is not consent," she said, "and endurance is not permission." The ruling came 2 weeks later. I was awarded full restoration of my trust interest, additional damages, legal fees, oversight penalties placed on the company. Rachel Moore was barred from financial consulting pending criminal investigation. My parents were censured. Amanda lost her controlling interest. Daniel resigned before he could be removed. The family business entered external management. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. After the ruling, my mother approached me in the hallway. She looked smaller, older. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. "I know," I replied, "but you did." She waited for forgiveness. I didn't give it. Not then. Not yet. Because forgiveness is not a performance, it's a process. I walked out of the courthouse alone. The air was cold, bright, clean. For the first time in my life, my future did not depend on anyone else's approval. And that realization was worth everything they tried to take. Chapter 7 would begin not with revenge, but with rebuilding, on my terms. The first quiet morning after the verdict felt unreal. No emails demanding explanations, no calls layered with accusation or guilt, no subtle reminders of what I owed anyone, just silence. I woke up in my apartment as sunlight crept through the curtains, illuminating dust motes floating lazily in the air. For years, mornings had begun with a mental inventory of obligations. What needed fixing? Who needed reassurance? Which crisis required my attention? That morning, there was none of it. And the absence felt almost uncomfortable. I made coffee slowly, deliberately, standing at the counter with both hands wrapped around the mug, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Ordinary noises, grounding ones, proof that the world hadn't ended just because my role in it had changed. The ruling had been clear, public, final. My trust was restored, my name cleared. The company placed under external oversight, Rachel Moore under investigation, my parents publicly reprimanded, Amanda stripped of authority she never should have had. Everything I had been denied was returned on paper. But paper doesn't rebuild a life. Choice does. Margaret called just after 9. "You're officially free," she said. "At least legally." I smiled faintly. "And otherwise?" "That part," she replied gently, "takes time." She was right. By noon, messages began arriving. Former colleagues expressing relief. Clients quietly admitting they had suspected something was wrong. A few distant relatives offering vague apologies wrapped in concern. I responded to none of them. Not yet. I spent the afternoon doing something radical. Nothing. I walked along the waterfront, coat pulled tight against the breeze, watching boats cut through the gray water. I sat on a bench and let memories rise without pushing them away. There were moments of grief I hadn't expected. Grief for the version of myself who believed loyalty would protect her. Grief for the sister I thought I had. Grief for a family that chose hierarchy over honesty. But there was relief, too. Deep, steady, unapologetic. That evening I returned home and opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years. The first page was blank. I wrote one sentence. What do I want now? The question stared back at me heavier than any legal document I'd signed. For so long, my wants had been filtered through usefulness, through approval, through fear of disruption. Now stripped of those constraints, the answer didn't come easily. I closed the notebook and let it rest. The next week, I declined the company's formal invitation to return. They offered a leadership role, a public reconciliation, a carefully worded statement about moving forward together. I read it once, then deleted it. Margaret supported the decision without hesitation. Sometimes the greatest power, she said, is walking away from what no longer deserves you. Instead, I accepted a short-term consulting role with a firm in Savannah. Independent, transparent, contract-based, no family ties, no emotional debt. The work was familiar enough to be grounding, different enough to feel like a clean slate. On my first day, no one knew my history. No one expected anything from me beyond competence. I had forgotten how freeing that felt. The call from my mother came late one night. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Her voice was softer than I remembered, less certain. "I heard you didn't go back." "I didn't," I said. A pause. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Another pause, longer this time. "I miss you," she said finally. I closed my eyes. I miss who we could have been. She didn't argue. That mattered more than an apology. Amanda never called. I didn't expect her to. Some people don't know how to exist without advantage. And some relationships only survive when one person is willing to be diminished. I wasn't anymore. Weeks passed, then months. The noise faded. The case stopped being news. My name stopped circulating as a cautionary tale or whispered scandal. It became just a name again. Mine. One afternoon, while unpacking a box I had ignored since moving, I found my grandmother's old watch. Simple, worn, still ticking. I strapped it onto my wrist and felt something settle into place. She had trusted me with more than money. She had trusted me to see clearly. That night I reopened the notebook. What do I want now? This time I wrote without hesitation. I want a life where silence is a choice, not a survival tactic. I want work that doesn't require erasure. I want relationships that don't punish honesty. I want peace that isn't borrowed from someone else's approval. The words felt steady, true. Rebuilding wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet decisions made consistently. Boundaries held. Invitations declined, new connections chosen carefully, and slowly the woman I had always been beneath the obligation began to surface. Not hardened, just whole. Chapter 8 would not be about revenge or justice. It would be about something far more difficult. Trust. Learning how to give it again, without losing myself. Trust did not return all at once. It arrived in fragments, uneven, cautious, sometimes unwanted. I learned quickly that rebuilding a life after betrayal isn't about replacing what was lost. It's about relearning how to stand without constantly scanning for the next collapse. In Savannah, my days took on a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar. I woke early, walked along the river before work, watched the water shift colors as the sun climbed. At the consulting firm, no one asked about my family. No one referenced my past. I was evaluated by deadlines, met problems solved, clarity delivered. Competence without emotional cost. At first, I kept people at a distance. Friendly, but unreachable. I answered questions directly, but offered nothing personal. Trust, once broken at that level, doesn't regenerate automatically. It has to be re-earned even by yourself. One afternoon, a colleague named Hannah invited me to lunch. She was in her early 40s, sharp, composed, with the kind of calm that suggested she had survived something she didn't advertise. We ate outside the air thick with salt and heat. "You don't talk much about your life," she observed not unkindly. "I've learned to be selective," I replied. She nodded, me too. That was all. No probing, no assumptions. Something loosened in my chest. Trust, I realized, isn't about disclosure. It's about respect for boundaries. Weeks passed. Projects ended. New ones began. My confidence returned, not in a rush, but steadily. I noticed I was sleeping better, laughing more easily, saying no without rehearsing an explanation. Then came the unexpected test. An email from Amanda. No subject line, no greeting. "I need to talk." I stared at the screen longer than I wanted to admit. My first instinct was irritation. The second was curiosity. The third was caution. I waited 2 days before responding. "What do you want to talk about?" Her reply came quickly. "I'm sorry." That was it. 2 words that carried no context and demanded everything. I didn't respond right away. I took a walk instead. Long, aimless, letting the humidity press against my skin, grounding me in the present. Apologies, I had learned, are only meaningful when followed by accountability, and Amanda had never been good at that. When I finally replied, I kept it simple. "I'm open to listening. I'm not open to being persuaded." She agreed to meet halfway between Savannah and Charleston at a quiet cafe off the highway. When I arrived, she was already there. She looked different, thinner, less polished. Her confidence had dulled, replaced by something closer to uncertainty. She stood when she saw me. "Thank you for coming." I nodded and sat. We ordered coffee. Black, no small talk. "I lost more than I expected," she said finally. I didn't respond. The company, the respect, The narrative I told myself about being the responsible one, she continued. I didn't think it would fall apart so completely. You built it on exclusion, I said calmly. That tends to collapse. She flinched. I know, she whispered. I see that now. I studied her face, the familiar features, the distance that had grown between us over years of unspoken competition. I'm not here to fix this, I said. I'm here to hear what you're taking responsibility for. She swallowed. I knew. About the amendment. About the transfers. I didn't stop it because it benefited me, and because I was afraid of losing my position. There it was. Not an excuse, not a justification, a truth. I'm sorry, she said again, not because I lost, but because I hurt you. I sat back, letting the words settle. Trust didn't flood back, but something else did. Closure. I don't know what our relationship looks like, I said honestly, but it can't look like before. She nodded. I wouldn't expect it to. We parted without hugs, without promises, without resolution, and that was enough. Driving back, I felt lighter than I had anticipated, not because forgiveness had been granted, but because honesty had finally replaced manipulation. That night I thought about trust differently. It wasn't about letting people close blindly. It was about allowing them to meet you where you stand, not where they want you to kneel. I began opening up more at work, small details, preferences, opinions, nothing that endangered me but enough to feel human again. I allowed friendships to form slowly. I let myself imagine a future not shaped by reaction, but by intention. Trust, I learned, is not a gift. It's a negotiation between clarity and courage, and I was finally strong enough for both. Chapter 9 would bring the final test. Not from my family, but from myself, choosing whether I would live cautiously forever, or fully despite everything. The final test didn't arrive as a threat. It arrived as an opportunity. An email marked confidential from a firm in Atlanta I had quietly admired for years. National reach, ethical reputation, a leadership role overseeing restructuring for family-owned businesses in transition. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stared at the screen, my pulse slow but deliberate. This wasn't about money or prestige or proving anything to anyone who had doubted me. This was about choice. For most of my life, my decisions had been shaped by anticipation. What would upset someone? What would create tension? What would cost me approval? Even when I fought back legally, the motivation had been survival, not ambition. This was different. This was forward-facing. I printed the email and carried it with me all day, folded neatly in my bag, like a secret I wasn't ready to open fully. At work, I completed my assignments with the same care I always had, but my thoughts kept drifting. Could I lead again? Could I trust myself in positions of power without shrinking? Could I enter spaces that resembled my past without reliving it? That evening, I called Margaret. She listened quietly as I explained the offer. When I finished, she asked one question. Are you afraid of failing, she said, or afraid of succeeding? The answer came too quickly. Succeeding. She didn't respond immediately. That fear doesn't mean you're not ready, she said finally. It means you've learned what power costs when it's misused. I hung up and sat in silence, the weight of her words settling into something solid. Later that night, I pulled out the notebook again. What do I want now? I turned to a fresh page. I want to stop making myself smaller to feel safe. I want to use what I've learned to protect others, not just myself. I want to trust my judgment even when it scares me. I closed the notebook and made a decision. The interview was scheduled for the following week. In Atlanta, the building was glass and steel, modern and unpretentious. I walked into the conference room with steady steps, wearing a simple suit, my grandmother's watch ticking softly against my wrist. They asked thoughtful questions, hard ones. How would I handle conflict within families? How would I prevent favoritism from undermining governance? How would I balance empathy with accountability? I answered honestly. I don't believe neutrality means silence, I said at one point. And I don't believe harmony is real if it requires one person to disappear. The panel didn't react immediately. Then one woman nodded. After the interview, I walked alone through the city, letting the noise and motion wash over me. I didn't replay my answers. I didn't critique myself. That was new. 2 days later, the offer arrived. Senior role, full authority, clear boundaries, transparent reporting structure. I accepted, not because it validated me, but because it aligned with me. The move came quickly. New apartment, new routine, new scale of responsibility. On my first day, as I stood at the head of a long table filled with executives, I felt a familiar flicker of old instinct, the urge to soften my voice, to defer, to be agreeable. I noticed it and let it pass. I value collaboration, I said evenly, but I don't confuse it with avoidance. If something isn't working, we will name it. No one objected. Afterward, in the quiet of my office, I sat alone and breathed. The test wasn't whether I could lead, it was whether I could lead without betraying myself. Weeks later, I received a letter forwarded from my parents' attorney, an attempt at reconciliation, carefully worded, vague, focused on moving forward. I read it once, then I placed it in a drawer and closed it. Not everything needs a response. Some endings are complete without commentary. One Sunday morning, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time since the trial ended. The air was cool, the ground soft beneath my feet. I stood there for a long time, hands folded, listening to the quiet. "They tried to take what you gave me," I said softly, "but they didn't understand what it really was." She hadn't left me money alone. She had left me discernment, the ability to see patterns, the courage to name injustice, the strength to walk away without bitterness. As I turned to leave, I felt something settle fully inside me. Not closure. Completion. The final test hadn't been whether I could forgive. It was whether I could live fully without waiting for permission. And I was. Chapter 10 would not bring another battle. It would bring something far rarer. Peace chosen deliberately. Peace did not arrive the way I imagined it would. It wasn't a sudden calm. It wasn't relief that washed over me in one clean wave. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like space. The kind of space that exists after something heavy has been set down and your body hasn't yet realized it's free to stand upright again. My days in Atlanta settled into a steady rhythm. Early mornings, long meetings, decisions that mattered. I was no longer reacting to inherited chaos or cleaning up emotional fallout. I was building structures advising families who still believed they could avoid hard conversations by postponing them. I recognized that instinct immediately. During one meeting, a father in his 60s leaned back in his chair and said, "We don't want to create conflict. We're a close family." I met his eyes calmly. "Conflict already exists," I said. "You're just choosing whether to manage it or let it explode later." The room went quiet. Afterward, a younger woman at the table lingered. She waited until everyone else left. "Thank you," she said quietly. No one's ever said that out loud. I drove home that evening thinking about how often silence is confused with peace. How many families mistake avoidance for harmony? How many women are praised for holding things together while quietly falling apart? That night I dreamed of my grandmother. She was standing at the kitchen counter, hands dusted with flour, looking over her shoulder at me with that familiar, knowing smile. "You're finally using your voice," she said. I woke up with tears on my cheeks and a strange sense of gratitude, not for what happened, but for what it revealed. The holidays came quietly that year. No invitations, no tense phone calls, no forced cheer. On Christmas morning, I made coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the city wake up. I didn't feel lonely. I felt grounded. I called Hannah later that afternoon. She invited me to her place where a small group of friends gathered around mismatched plates and easy laughter. No one asked about my family. No one filled the silence with obligation. It was the most honest holiday I'd had in years. A week later, Amanda sent another message. I hesitated before opening it. "I'm starting therapy. I needed you to know that." I stared at the words, my chest tightening in a way that surprised me. I typed back slowly. "I'm glad you are. Nothing more, nothing less." Some bridges aren't rebuilt. They're acknowledged, and sometimes that's enough. By spring, the case had fully faded from public attention. Rachel Moore's investigation moved forward quietly. My parents sold their house. The company restructured under new leadership, its name still intact, but its power redistributed. I watched all of it from a distance. Not out of bitterness, out of boundaries. One afternoon, Margaret invited me to lunch. We sat near a window, sunlight warming the table between us. "You've changed," she said, studying me. "I hope so," I replied. She smiled. "You're not carrying it anymore." Carrying it. The guilt, the responsibility, the emotional labor disguised as loyalty. She was right. I had put it down. Later that day, I walked through a bookstore and stopped in front of a shelf labeled Family Systems. I pulled out a book, flipped through a few pages, then smiled to myself and put it back. I didn't need more theory. I had lived it. That evening, I opened my notebook one last time. What do I want now? I didn't hesitate. I want a life where my worth is not negotiable. I want relationships built on truth, not obligation. I want to choose peace without apologizing for it. I closed the notebook and placed it in a drawer. Some chapters don't need revisiting. As summer approached, I began mentoring younger women at work. Not formally, not publicly, just quiet conversations, honest ones. I told them what I wished someone had told me sooner. Pay attention when you're praised for being easy to overlook. Question systems that benefit from your silence. And remember that loyalty without reciprocity is not a virtue. One evening as I locked up my office, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked older than I had a year ago. Stronger, too. The woman staring back at me was not hardened. She was clear. Clear about what she would no longer tolerate. Clear about what she deserved. Clear about who she was becoming. Peace, I realized, wasn't passive. It was active. Chosen daily. Protected deliberately. Maintained with courage. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission to keep it. Chapter 11 would bring the final reckoning. Not with my family, but with the version of myself who once believed love required self-erasure. And I was ready to meet her. I met the woman I used to be on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. No dramatic trigger, no confrontation, just a quiet moment that caught me off guard. I was reviewing a proposal from a family-owned manufacturing firm, a familiar story unfolding on the page. Parents nearing retirement. 2 siblings positioned as successors. One described as visionary, the other as supportive. The language was polite, professional, and painfully clear to me now. Supportive meant expendable. I leaned back in my chair and felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear, recognition. There she was. The version of me who would have accepted that framing without protest. Who would have volunteered to carry the weight so others could stand taller. Who believed love was proven by endurance. I closed the file and stared out the window at the city below, cars threading through intersections like veins carrying momentum forward. "You don't live here anymore," I said quietly. The word surprised me. For years, that woman had been my compass. She kept me safe by making me small. She taught me how to survive rooms where my presence was tolerated, not celebrated. She learned early that visibility invited conflict, and conflict cost belonging. I owed her something. Not obedience, acknowledgement. After work, I walked instead of driving, letting the late afternoon air cool my skin. My steps slowed as memories surfaced. Moments I had minimized, dismissed, rationalized. The time my opinion was praised and ignored in the same breath. The promotion dangled, then redirected. The quiet pride I felt when someone said, "We couldn't do this without you," even as they ensured I never had authority. I had mistaken usefulness for value. That realization had been painful the first time. Now it felt clarifying. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself, something simple and grounding. As I ate, I let myself grieve without judgment. Not loudly, not dramatically, just honestly. I grieved the years I spent negotiating my own existence. The birthdays I downplayed, the needs I postponed, the truths I swallowed to preserve an image of harmony that never truly included me. I also recognized something else. She did what she knew how to do. The woman I used to be kept me alive in a system that benefited from my silence. She learned the rules early and followed them flawlessly. That wasn't weakness. That was adaptation. But adaptation is not destiny. I opened my laptop and typed a message to the firm whose proposal I'd been reviewing. Before sending, I paused. Old instinct whispered, "Soften it. Don't sound difficult." I deleted the draft and started again. The version I sent was clear, direct, unapologetic. I highlighted the imbalance, named the risk, outlined the consequences if the structure remained unchanged. I didn't cushion the truth. I pressed send and felt a calm settle over me. That was the reckoning. Not a battle, not a speech. A decision to stop editing myself for comfort. Later that week, I ran into Margaret unexpectedly at a conference. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You look lighter," she said. "I am," I replied. She smiled. "What changed?" "I stopped negotiating with ghosts," I said. She laughed softly. "That'll do it." That night back in my hotel room, I thought about how often women are told to move on without ever being allowed to integrate what they survived. How healing is framed as forgetting instead of understanding. I didn't want to forget. I wanted to incorporate. I took out the notebook one last time, flipping back through earlier pages. The fear, the anger, the clarity, the resolve. On a fresh page I wrote, "I no longer confuse endurance with love. I no longer accept proximity as proof of care. I no longer betray myself to maintain peace." The words felt final in the best possible way. The next morning, I woke before my alarm rested and alert. The city outside was quiet, the sky pale with early light. I thought about my family, not with longing or resentment, but with distance, a healthy one. I understood now that some people don't lose you because you change. They lose you because you stop disappearing. That afternoon, the firm responded to my message. They thanked me, and then they asked to revise the structure. That mattered. Not because I needed validation, but because it confirmed something I had come to believe deeply. Truth changes systems when it's delivered without apology. As I packed to return home, I felt something settle completely. The woman I used to be had kept me safe until I was strong enough to step into something more honest. I didn't need to reject her. I needed to release her. And in doing so, I finally made room for the woman I had always been becoming. Chapter 12 would not be about proving anything. It would be about living in alignment, without fear, without performance, without shrinking. And that I knew now was the real victory. Alignment is quieter than victory. There are no witnesses, no applause, no moment where the world stops to acknowledge that you finally chose yourself. It simply shows up in how you live. I noticed it one morning when my alarm didn't fill me with dread. When my first thought wasn't about who I needed to manage or what version of myself I needed to perform that day. I got out of bed without negotiating with guilt. I made coffee without rushing. I looked out at the city and felt present instead of braced. That was alignment. It showed up in my work too. In meetings where I spoke plainly and didn't replay my words afterward. In decisions made without checking whether they would disappoint someone who had no right to my sacrifice. In the way people responded to clarity with respect instead of resistance. The systems I worked with began to change slowly but visibly. Families resisted at first. They always do. But when patterns were named early, when favoritism was confronted instead of dressed up as tradition, something unexpected happened. Relief. People don't actually want to live inside lies. They just don't know how to exit them without someone lighting the way. I had become that person. Not because I was fearless, but because I had learned what fear costs when it runs the show. Months passed, then a year. My parents never tried again. The silence between us became permanent, and I made peace with that. Not every ending needs closure. Some endings simply need distance. Amanda sent updates occasionally. Therapy, a new job, attempts at rebuilding a sense of self without inherited power. I wished her well without stepping back into orbit. That was alignment too. One evening after a long day, I sat alone in my apartment with the windows open, city noise drifting in softly. I took out my grandmother's watch and placed it on the table in front of me. It still ticked steadily. I thought about how much had changed since that Thanksgiving dinner, since the first forged signature, since the moment I realized love had conditions I was never meant to question. I hadn't just reclaimed my inheritance. I had reclaimed my authority. Authority over my time, over my voice, over the story I told myself about who I was allowed to be. I no longer measured my worth by proximity to family or approval from those who benefited from my silence. I no longer confused being needed with being loved. I no longer believed endurance was the price of belonging. I belonged to myself first. Everything else was optional. One afternoon, while mentoring a small group of women at work, someone asked a question that stayed with me. How do you know when it's time to stop trying to fix things and just walk away? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, when fixing requires you to disappear. The room went quiet. I saw recognition flicker across faces, the same recognition I once had too late. That night, walking home, I realized something important. My story wasn't about revenge. Yes, there had been justice. Yes, there had been consequences. But the real transformation didn't happen in courtrooms or depositions or verdicts. It happened in the moment I stopped asking for permission to exist fully. Revenge burns hot and fast, alignment burns steady. It warms instead of consuming. If you're listening to this story and you recognize yourself somewhere inside it, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not difficult for noticing patterns. You are not disloyal for asking questions. You are not selfish for refusing to shrink anymore. Families, workplaces, and systems that depend on your silence will always call your awakening a betrayal. It isn't. It's honesty. And honesty is disruptive only to what shouldn't survive. My life now isn't perfect. It's real. It's spacious. It's mine. I make decisions without fear of emotional retaliation. I rest without guilt. I speak without rehearsing. That is the inheritance they could never take. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of something you've lived or something you're still living, I invite you to stay. Like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this don't end with one woman finding her voice. They continue every time someone listening decides to stop disappearing too. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't payback. It's becoming unrecognizable to the version of you they tried to control. That is where freedom begins.